We spoke about the differences, that despite the similarity between Kabbalah and philosophy, that both of them want the practitioner or the practicing person to achieve that deep knowledge of the divine. The means are different. In philosophy, it's logic. In Kabbalah, it's the holy logic of the soul. The purpose in philosophy is intellectual perfection and acquiring knowledge. In Kabbalah, it's theurgy, the ability to impact the divine or to be involved actively in the act of creation. Now, here maybe is the most revolutionary idea and difference between Kabbalah and philosophy, and that is the content of Theosophy. Meaning, or in other words, how do we see God? I mean, because both of them say you have to achieve that like deep esoteric knowledge, right? But what is it knowledge that we want to achieve? How are we going to view God? So when you look at halakha, which is part of rabbinic literature, here I divide into two branches: halakha and agadah. In halakha, God is legislator and judge. You have to do A, B, C, that you have to follow, etc. And the God is always, and if you don't do it, you'll be punished. In Agadah, God is both a father and a king. So sometimes he could be harsh with his followers. Sometimes he's compassionate, like a father. I would say that at one point the masters of Agadah rebuked the masters of Halakha, telling them that they're focusing too much on halakha and they abandoned the personal relationship between humans and God. And there's a famous statement that is found in the Agadah saying, "Miyom sheharav bet hamikdash," from after the destruction, "En lo le'akadosh baruch hu be'olamo ela arba amot shel halakha." God only has the 4 cubits of halakha. So many scholars of halakha take this to mean that halakha is the most important thing, but other people would say that the masters of Agadah said that, telling the legal-minded people that they have confined God and put him in that box of halakha that is only 4 cubits wide. That and that's why they use the term el arba amot shel halakha. You are using your yardstick, your measuring tape, to say, okay, God can come from here to here, right? Like when you build a sukkah has to be between 10 handbreadths to 20 cubits. So if it's less than that or more than that, God cannot enter. So maybe that's a hidden rebuke that we find there. But in any case, that's in halakha or agadah. In rabbinic literature, it's mostly the images of known characters that we project on God. So, in a sense, we go back to what I said about the first chapters of Bereshit. In the first chapter, God creates man in his image. In the second chapter, man creates God in his image, in the image of man. So, however, and it's a natural thing, we understand, because we could compare or think of things in terms that are familiar to us. So, if we know figures of authority as the legislator, the judge, the father, the king, this is the image that we identify God with, right? Nobody identifies God with a baby, because a baby does not seem as a figure of authority, except to young parents, like the first baby, then controlling. But we don't do that. In philosophy, though, the focus of Theosophy, like what is the image of God? God is the cause of all causes. And by the way, this term is not used in the Zohar. It is used in satellite writings around the Zohar. The Zohar is made of like at least 10 different books. It's called, one of them is Ra'aya Me'emna, Midrash HaNe'alam, and Zohar Hadash. But in the Zohar proper, we don't find the term cause of all causes, ilata ilot. That is a philosophical term. That ilata ilot or sibata sibot is the cause for the existence of all other causes. So even the cause for something to exist would not exist without the original cause, which is God. So an abstract, completely abstract concept. That concept must logically exist, because when you travel back in time, both theologically or philosophically, you get to the point that says, okay, so what caused this to happen? Right? Where did the Big Bang come from? Where did the black hole come from? Where did matter, etc.? So it was something caused this to happen. And in philosophy, it's God. So God must exist. It's a logical deduction. Based on what we perceive with our senses, there must be an entity who created the world. Now, but that entity cannot be described in positive terms. I cannot say God is solid or liquid or big or small or anything like that. I can only describe God by what He is not. He is not divisible. He is not multiple. He is not limited by time, etc., etc. And of course, we could, even according to philosophy, we could know something of Him by looking at His handiwork. So by looking at creation, you understand the greatness of God. But again, you can't define what God is. In Kabbalah, though, we have a new system, and that is where it completely deviates from the traditional teachings. And that is, we have a complex divinity and different entities in that complex divinity. And those entities are set in a system of 10 sefirot, which in turn are not the full divinity. Remember that when we looked at the tree of Sefirot, or Ilana Sefirot, I said that the Keter, the highest Sefirah, is called Keter Ein Sof. And we'll talk about that, the infinite, the Ein Sof, that is really not part of the divinity, at least not as in the sense of the divinity that we understand and that we can communicate with. This is like, if you think about science, this is what lies beyond the universe. If we can imagine the universe as as something that stretches and stretches to infinity, then beyond infinity, our infinity for the Kabbalist is the Sefirot, and what's beyond infinity is the Keter and Sof. So we have that system of the crown, which emanated its energy or its will to the lower Sefirot. Later on, we find it in the Zohar, in Petihat Eliyahu. They are also identified with the members of the body, which it's a problem by itself. We'll put it aside for a second. So the Kabbalah, as I said, distinguishes between Sefirot and Ein Sof. They are all infinite, but there are different types of infinity. The Ein Sof is hidden, and it's hidden in the meaning that it's incomprehensible and beyond our grasp. And so it is hidden both in the sense that it does not directly participate in creation. The Ein Sof, that Keter or that infinity, is not actively involved in creation. Rather, it emanated the other Sefirot, and they are the ones that are engaged in creation. But not only that, we said that the theology describes a two-way street, right? It's the energy that flows from God to humans and from humans to God. So in the sense of the energy that flows from the divine to humans, and in the form of creation, God is not involved in creation. And when we talk about the energy that flows from us towards God, we cannot approach God. That God, the Ein Sof, the Keter, cannot be approached by us. Even the God of Sinai, even the God of Matan Torah, and all of God's names in the Torah, in the Tanakh, do not represent the Ein Sof. They represent the lower Sefirot, the lower emanations of God. Rabbi Azrael of Chelona, so 12th century of the circle of the Kabbalist of Cherona, to which also later on we have Rabbi Moshe ben Nachman, Ramban. The story is the 13th century. Writes this: Dar ki en sof lo yikanes behirhur v'chol sheken bediבור אף על פי שיש לו רמז בכל דבר שאין חוץ ממנו ולכך אין אות ואין שם ואין מכתב אשר יגבילנו. You should know, he says, I should have written this here, Dar is a sort of a very strong statement. You should know that Ein Sof cannot be contained by thought, and even more so by speech. Even though it is alluded to in everything in creation, because there is none but him, so yet it cannot be contained. So, in other words, when you look at the flower is a manifestation of God. So is God contained by the flower? Yes, but not the Ein Sof. Other Sefirot are contained in the flower, sort of. And therefore there is no letter or name or a written form which will confine him. So, here we go back in the commentary of Rabbi Azriel. We go back to the discussion of the importance of language, because to come to think of it, you put 1 second aside the idea, the mystical idea, right? And we could assign this description to our thoughts or our personality or our feelings, right? The power of language is that it could transform certain things that I feel, certain emotions, certain knowledge, to you, and you could imagine yourself being in the same situation where I am. The power of a good story is in that it really transforms the reader and places him in a different setting. You know where the narrator is, or what he does, or he feels. But we know also that is limited. There are certain things that you can never express, right? Even when we think about physical things, we cannot express a smell with words, or flavor, or colors with words. We are limited in what we are able to express by words. And interestingly enough, the word that the rabbis used in Hebrew, it's a rabbinical word for the word right? How do you say word in rabbinical Hebrew? Do you know? Teva, as in Rashi Tevot, acronym, say Rashi Tevot, the beginning of the word. So what is the word Teva in English? It's box. So to say a word is basically to put your thought in a box and to give that box to someone else. And that is in a way what Rabbi Azriel says here. Of course, taking it to a much higher level, he says there are certain understanding of the divine in the world which cannot be contained with a thought. I mean, take this concept that I related about ourselves, about the human experience, how we are limited in what we are able to express with words. And we know that we have a greater flexibility when we think of thought, right? When we speak of thoughts, right? How frustrated we are sometimes when something is so clear to us in our, mentally. We know exactly what it is. We know exactly what we feel, what we think. But when we try to communicate it with words, we don't find the right words to express it, because now it is lost in translation or in transmission. So the thought has a greater flexibility or capability of understanding than the word. But he says, Ein Sof, it cannot be contained even by thought, even more so by words. And though it is alluded, remez is an allusion, it is alluded to in every object of creation, there is none but him, and it is alluded to because there's none but him. And then again, this statement, Kol davar she'en she'en chutz mimenu, you could see philosophical elements here. Because this is what Maimonides says, if im ya'aleh al ha'da'at shelo yimatzeh, lo yimatzu acher nimtza mibiladav. If you would be able to envision a situation where God does not exist, nothing else would exist. So if God is the cause of all existence, in an essence, He exists in every object, right? Like this, I exist because God exists. So God is in me. And so Rabbi Azrael says, I'm not a reflection of God, even I am an illusion to God. My existence is an illusion, is a hint that God exists, but nothing more than that. And he says, and therefore, en ot ve'en shem ve'en michtav asher yagbilenu. Trying to put God, to describe Him in words or letters, is to confine Him, to limit Him, and that is impossible. From the same period, we have the anonymous author of Ma'arichet HaElohut. Ma'arichet HaElohut means Ma'arichet means today a system, but in their language, Ma'arichet is sort of a hierarchy, from the word la'aroch, or to set. So yeah, it is related to the word system. And he was a contemporary of the Zohar, writes the following: Veda ki ha'en sof asher zacharnu enenu ramuz lo b'Torah velo b'ketuvim velo b'nevi'im velo b'divrei Hazal. You should know that the Ein Sof, which we have mentioned, has no allusion in the Torah, prophets, scriptures, or rabbinical literature. But the Kabbalists were handed a bit of an allusion. So let's start from the end. What he says is that the Kabbalists are the master of esoteric knowledge. What do they know of the Ein Sof? They have k'tzat remez. Remez is already something which is diminished. It's only an illusion. It's not the real thing. But they don't get the full remez. They get k'tzat remez. They get somewhat of an illusion. And that too was handed to them from their masters. So now, that is a very, I would say, not ambitious, but a very far-reaching claim. What he's saying here is that the Kabbalists of his time, of the 12th or the 13th century, are finally revealing information about knowledge that was so well kept that for at least 2,500 years, no one had no idea of it. It's not mentioned in the Torah, in the prophets, in the scriptures, or in rabbinic literature. How is that possible? But that claim was accepted. So let's go a little bit into the nature of Ein Sof. Unless you have questions of what we've discussed so far. No, so good. So, but people were willing to accept that, right? That statement. So let's talk a little bit about the Ein Sof and where does it stand in the development of a philosophical thought. So you recall that already when we studied the text of the Bahir, we saw the term Ein Sof, or we saw it, but there it means infinity. In the Zohar, it became a noun. It became a noun that describes God. And the Ein Sof connotes the lack of any definition known to us, as well as the lack of personal attributions or character traits. Meaning, it defies description, and it defies character. I mean, we cannot describe or define that Ein Sof. That Ein Sof has no character trait or personal attribution that is known to us. So there's like a complete void between us and that Ein Sof. Now, scholars have pointed out that when you look at that, there is a similarity to Gnosticism. Gnostic sect that existed parallel to Christianity. Now, the Gnostic Bible has been published. There are manuscripts that were found in Qumran and in the Dead Sea, in the Dead Sea caves. In Gnosticism, the main theology, the main idea is that there is a kind of a duality of creation, but duality that sort of leaves room for monotheism, and for that reason, there were Jews who were in touch with Gnostics and kept alive some of their teachings. They believed in the agnostos theos. Theos is God, and agnostos mean unknown, right? We still use the term gnosis in English in some as a suffix, as in diagnosis or prognosis. Gnosis means knowledge. So agnostos is the unknown. So that we have the unknown God. On the other hand, we have the demiurgus, who is the creator. So it seems like it's the same system. We have the hidden God, the unknown God, which is inaccessible and is not involved in creation. On the other hand, we have that God who is involved in creation. So scholarship believes that Sphirot theology has clearly been influenced by Gnosticism. The idea that there is a system which represents God and controls or runs the world is very similar to Gnosticism. I just have to comment also that in pre-Islamic culture, there was a similar concept, which it's interesting to think of as perhaps it's just a process of evolution, that as civilizations evolves, people realize more and more that statues and idols do not represent deities, and they look for a different system to explain how the world is being run. So in the pre-Islamic period, which the Muhammad later named Jahiliyyah, meaning the period of ignorance or darkness, the Arabs, the dwellers of the Arabian Peninsula, believed in a deity called Allah. Allah is not an invention of Muhammad. They had Allah before. It could be that it was an influence of the many Jews who lived in Saudi Arabia. It was not called Saudi Arabia. In the Arabian Peninsula, or the Hijaz, there were many Jews there, so maybe they took the name Elohim and turned it to Allah. But the interesting thing about this Allah was that he didn't run the world. He was removed from the world, and instead the world was run by his representatives, who happened to be his 3 daughters. In any case, this system of a removed God and a more engaged God exists as Gnosticism. But when we come to the duality between the demiurgus, the creator, and the agnostos theos, the unknown God, it's not the same duality. Why? Because in the ideology of Gnosticism, in that theology, the demiurgus rebels against God. So the hidden God, there's a rebellion against him, and that demiurgus emerges and creates the world. But in Kabbalah, God himself, he is the source of creation, and which is closer to the Neoplatonian philosophy, where he is the cause that we cannot define or pinpoint the will or the reason or the system of or the chain of events that brought to the creation of the world, but we know that has been the beginning. This is the way that it has been analyzed. And here now we come to the question that Caroline posed before: why is this happening at that time? What is happening here? And we understand that as development as a result of the synthesis between popular Judaism. We spoke before about rabbinic Judaism, or popular Judaism, and philosophy. So, popular Judaism, God was anthropomorphic, either by shape or by character traits, as we like. He's the father, he's the judge, he's sort of human, but also they were books that spoke about. There was a book called Shi'ur Koma, which was basically the measurements of God. How long are his hands? How long are his legs, etc.? His nose. So the people needed a physical shape of God to relate to, even when they understood that paganism should be eschewed, but they still wanted some physical image to connect to, and much more so in the Christian world than in the Muslim world. Because in the Christian world, you see the imagery everywhere. Everything is depicted by images, either sculptures or murals or mosaics. I mean, it's everywhere, and so people tended to automatically envision God in a certain way. And on the other hand, there was the philosophy which was transcendental and said that God is far removed from us. There's no way that we could get closer to God. And like we saw previously in what Maimonides said, as much as he's fond of philosophy and he believes that he is able to achieve very high levels of knowledge of God through philosophy, still he says here, ידע מן העניינים האלוקיים אמיתת כל מה שאפשר שתיוודע אמיתתו. He will know all that which could be verified, ויקרב לאמיתת מה שאי אפשר בו רק להתקרב אל אמיתתו. And then he will know, he will hear, and he will be near the truth wherever an approach to the truth is possible. They have reached the goal, meaning the more accurately, he will be as near as possible to the knowledge of God. So Maimonides recognizes, as much as you will toil with philosophy to get near God, you will never be able to get there. So now we have this disparity, or even an abyss that is there between the philosophical approach and the rabbinical approach, where on one hand, or the popular approach, where people understand God as an immediate, very close and accessible God, almost human God, and the philosophy which sees God as far removed and detached and not engaged, inaccessible. Now one could argue that this is something that we already, this concept of duality is already found in the Bible, which is alluded to, meaning that this is a sort of a conflict or a dilemma that we understand subconsciously. If I go back to the question that was raised before about prayer, how do we understand prayer? If the Kabbalists claim that they have the power to affect God, right, by knowing the wisdom or the secrets of His name, but that was not unique to the Kabbalists. I mean, we go back in time, and the whole concept of prayer. What do you do when you pray to God? If God intended to do something, is your prayer going to change Him? Or, let's put it in different words. If God is the Almighty God, who created the universe and all which is in it, why would He care about my prayer? And if He is that God which could be accessed or approached by my prayer, how does He have the power to control the whole universe? Meaning that you want to view the supreme king of the world as someone who is far removed. Otherwise, He doesn't have the power to do what is needed to do. And where do we find this duality in Tanakh? I'm going to skip 1 second to a different source. Where do we find it? We find it in... No, not this. Sorry. So here is a prayer that some Jews know by heart. Some say it every 3 times a day. It's the Asher Yoshvei Betecha, which starts actually with the words Tehillah LeDavid. But look what this interesting phenomenon in this psalm. He says this: Aromimcha Eloi HaMelech, I will praise you, my God, King. I will bless your name. I will bless you every day, and I will praise your name eternally. God is great and praised, Verse 4, they will praise your deeds. They will praise your glory, your mighty deeds, your goodness. In verse 8, God is merciful and gracious, patient and faithfulness. He is good to all, and He has patience and mercy for all. Verse 10 and 11, they will thank you, they will bless you, they will speak of your glory, etc. In verse 12, in order to make His mighty handiwork known to man, etc. You see the pattern here and the problem. Do we address God in the second person or in the third person? Is he present or is he concealed? So we say, God, you're great. Everybody praises God. God is wonderful. He helps everyone. Is this just a mishap in our language that we feel uncomfortable talking next to God with such direct language, or maybe we already find here the seeds of that understanding of duality, that God is on one hand is accessible and is everywhere and is omnipresent, on the other hand is transcendental and far removed from us. So that I think is the grain of the idea that is later on was taken by the Kabbalists and developed to new dimensions. So here, like I said, there was a clash between the two philosophies, and that clash is expressed by Rabbi Yehuda Levi in his book Akuzari, and he says this. The Kuzari, the framework. The frame of the story. It's based on a true story where the king of Kuzar converted to Judaism. Rabbi Yehuda Levi wrote a philosophical book based on that, where he presents argument for different religions and philosophy by a Muslim scholar, a Christian scholar, and a philosopher to the king of Khazar. The king of Khazar rejects all of them and finally calls the Haver, the Jewish scholar, and he is able to convince him that Judaism is the right way. So here in part 4, in chapter 4, part 16, the Kuzari says the following: Kvar yitba'er li ha'hefresh ben Elohim ve'Adonai, v'havinoti ma ben Elohei Avraham ve'Elohei Aristo, ושאדוני תחשפנה לו הנפשות בטעם וראייה, ואלוהים יתה אליו הקשה. So the Kuzari says, now I understand what is the difference between Elohim and Havaya, and the name of God, the ineffable name, the four-letter name. I understand the difference between the God of Abraham and the God of Aristo, and that Havaya is craved by the souls in flavor and sight, and Elohim will be achieved by logic. So what Rabbi Yehuda Levi says here is that the term Elohim and Havaya or Adonai in rabbinic literature was already identified as Elohim is Midat Adin, is harsh judgment, rigorous judgment, and Havaya is mercy or loving kindness. And he says there are two names of God which represent two different things. Va'avinoti ma ben Elohei Avraham ve'Elohei Aristo. So that for him is also the difference between God of Abraham, which is an immediate God, an accessible God. God of Abraham talks to him, stands with him, sends angels to visit him. He's a very engaged God, very accessible and personal God. To an extent, the verse that we quoted before in chapter 18 of Genesis, where God says, I have chosen Abraham because he is the one who will take care of his children, he will educate them. This is someone who's a God who's involved and engaged and knows little details about the person who is his servant. Whereas the other concept of God is Elohei Aristo. That's a jab at the philosophers. The God of Aristotle is the God of Maimonides, because Maimonides followed this philosophical path, and he is also a concept of. This is also a concept of God, but the difference is Hashem tichsofna lo nefashot b'ta'am u'riyah. that our soul craves to feel God through flavor and through sight, meaning through all of our senses, not just by logic, not just with the abstract analysis. Ve'elohim yiteh elav hakashe, or yiteh elav hakasha. But in order to get to understand God, we have to use logical deduction. That would go back to the names Elohim and Havaya. That we understand the word, the name of Yud Hey Vav Hey, the way is it written, and probably the name, the way it was pronounced, even though we don't know exactly how it was pronounced. That name in itself connotes a certain sense of fluidity, because it is combined of, and this is not mystical. This is, if we just look at the plain usage in the Bible, and where the name Adonai appears in those letters Yud Hey Vav Hey, we realize that it connotes a certain sense of flexibility and fluidity. It is indeed Haya Hoveh V'yeh, he who was, he who is, and he who will be. But it means also that he adjusts himself to changing circumstances, or that at least in our eyes, he is perceived each time in a different way. We change, and through our changes we perceive God differently. So there is this flexible, accessible, more humane God, and that transcendental, far removed God. That was the clash that the Kuzari presents. That was the problem, the dilemma that people struggle with. The Kabbalistic solution was to introduce this kind of duality versus the unity of God. So God is still one God, but in God there are different powers. One is the God of the philosophers, the transcendental God, which is far removed and inaccessible, and the other one is the human, accessible God, which is the God of the Sefirot, which explains also why the imagery of the tree of Sefirot becomes an imagery of the human body. And also, all these Sefirot are basically, even though they are character traits that are attributed in the Bible to God, they could also be attributed to human beings. Loving kindness, intelligence, wisdom, the tiferet, glory, all these can be understood also as human character traits. Even the term malchut, and if you think about the difference, what is the difference between keter and malchut, right? So that could be understood as keter is the actual crown that only belongs to the king, whereas the malchut is to be regal, to be royal, which for that you do not necessarily have to be king. So those are character traits that could be espoused by humans as well. So here, this is where the Kabbalah was able to reconcile the two. But of course, that did not go easy, because we have that danger, which they were already attacked for, of viewing the God as divided, as having multiple levels. So they insisted, the Kabbalists insisted, that God is one, and they again and again you would find in the Zohar the statement Vechola Hadahu, and it is all one, and they all go back to the one, but they slip sometimes, meaning that even though they try to present the image of, no, we believe in that one God where everything emanates from one source and it's just a different manifestation, or it has to do with our perception of God. Sometimes the slip is immediate, like in this example, Tahazeh. This is those initials Tafhet. Usually in rabbinic literature are Talmid Hacham, but in the Zohar it's very common, and it's Tahazeh. come and see, which is also, sorry about that. It's also telling about the nature of the Zohar. In the rabbinic literature, when you want to bring a proof or to say something, you use the term ta shema, come and hear. In the Zohar is ta hazeh, come and see, meaning that following in the footsteps of the ecstatic mystics who had the ecstatic experience, they actually see the visions of divinity. So what do they say here? Kudusha berichu apik aser kitrin itrin kadishin le'ela de'itatar behu umitlabash behu. Come and see, the Kadosh Baruch Hu brought out 10 holy crowns above. I didn't know, kitrin, atarin, it's crowns and coronas, or diadems, above, in which he is crowned and garbed. So there's an overlay. That repetition of the nouns keter and atara are the same thing, or different types of crowns. But what he does with them, he uses them as a crown and as garments. So he's crowned and garbed by them. But he is them and they are him. Those crowns are part of him. Those garbs are part of him. As a flame attached to the coal, and there is no division there. Just as the flame is immediately emanating from the coal, and it's contained in it. Even though that, if you really want to go to the bottom of this imagery, it's a bit disturbing, because we know that the coal eventually will be consumed and will disappear. It's not an infinite source of energy, but for the time being where it burns and the way it is perceived in our eyes, that is fine, and there's no division there, and this will never be divided. It's all one. So this is where the Kabbalists insist on the unity of God. But as I said, there's a slip here. We'll see. I think we will analyze it, God willing, next week in the next session, and we'll stop here.